When the Artie family bought a 190-year-old mansion in Oyster Bay, Long Island, they thought they had found the perfect project. The house had been empty for years, its walls covered in dust and its gardens swallowed by weeds. To most people, it looked like a forgotten ruin. But to Jaime and France Artie, it was a treasure waiting to shine again. They imagined bright rooms, restored wood floors, and laughter echoing through the halls. For them, this was not just a home. It was a chance to bring a piece of history back to life. Oyster Bay itself was a town that seemed frozen in time, filled with old colonial houses and landmarks from the Revolutionary era. Beneath the quiet beauty, though, the town held many untold stories. Stories of wealth, loss, and secrets hidden for generations. The Arties didn't know it yet, but their dream renovation would lead them into one of those buried tales. As they began their work, they quickly realized that the mansion's past was much more complicated and darker than anyone had imagined. What started as a simple home improvement project would soon turn into a historical mystery that connected them to a chapter of American history few people talk about today. The first surprise didn't come from inside the house, but from the ground outside. The garden was a mess. Vines tangled around old stones, roots breaking through cracked paths, and weeds covering almost everything. One afternoon, while clearing an overgrown corner, Jaime noticed something unusual. Beneath a layer of dirt, a small gray stone was sticking out. At first, she thought it was just an old piece of pavement, or part of a wall that had collapsed long ago. But when she brushed the dirt away, she saw something that made her freeze. There were letters carved into the stone. They were faint, but clear enough to read. A name and a date from the 1700s. Her heart began to race. This wasn't a piece of building material. It was a grave marker. Shocked, she called her husband, and together they began to clear the area more carefully. As they dug, more stones appeared. Some broken, some half-buried, all arranged in a pattern that looked like a small family cemetery. The Arties stood silently, realizing that their new home sat beside, or perhaps even on top of, a forgotten graveyard. The names on the stones matched those of the Munn family, one of Oyster Bay's oldest and most respected lineages. But among them was one name that stood out from all the rest: Sophia Moore. A name that would open the door to an incredible and unsettling story from America's past. Sophia Moore's headstone was different from the others. It was smaller, simpler, but placed directly among the graves of the Munn family. That alone was unusual. In the 1700s, burials were separated by race and class. Black people, whether free or enslaved, were rarely buried beside wealthy white families. Yet here was Sophia Moore, a black woman, resting among them as if she were one of their own. Her grave dated back to 1786, a time when slavery was still legal in New York. Jaime couldn't stop wondering, who was this woman? And why was she buried here? What made her so important to the Munns that they placed her among them? Word of the discovery spread quickly through the town. Local historians and researchers visited the site, amazed by what they saw. They explained that Sophia's burial was extremely rare for that time. Most black people were buried in unmarked graves or separate cemeteries far from wealthy families. Sophia's grave, however, seemed to tell a story of respect, or perhaps a complicated bond, between her and the Munns. Jaime decided she had to learn more. She started researching Sophia's name, digging through town records, property deeds, and family histories. What she found over the following months changed everything she thought she knew about her house, her town, and even her country's history. Through old documents and local archives, Jaime learned that Sophia Moore had been enslaved by the Munn family in the 1700s. Like many wealthy families in New York during that time, the Munns owned enslaved people who worked in their homes, farms, and estates. But Sophia's story didn't end there. Against all odds, she had managed to buy her own freedom, something very few enslaved people were able to do. Historians believe she worked tirelessly for years, saving whatever she could until she was able to pay for her liberty. After gaining her freedom, Sophia chose to stay close to Oyster Bay, perhaps continuing to work for the Munn family. This decision might seem strange today, but for many freed individuals, leaving was dangerous. Racism and laws still limited their freedom even after emancipation. For Sophia, remaining near the Munns might have been both a practical and emotional choice, perhaps out of familiarity, gratitude, or deep, complex bonds formed over years. When she died in 1786, decades before New York officially abolished slavery, the Munn family buried her in their own plot. It was an extraordinary gesture for its time, one that suggested recognition of her strength and humanity. Her headstone, though modest, became a powerful symbol of quiet defiance in a society still ruled by inequality. As Jaime continued her research, she discovered that Sophia's story wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a much larger, forgotten history. Many people think slavery existed only in the American South, but that isn't true. For over 200 years, enslaved Africans lived and worked throughout New York. They helped build roads, farms, and even cities. On Long Island, wealthy families like the Munns depended on enslaved labor for their comfort and status. Yet their stories were often erased. When slavery was finally abolished in New York in 1827, many freed black people still faced discrimination and hardship. Few were remembered in records, and even fewer had gravestones. This made Sophia Moore's burial all the more remarkable. Her grave became proof that the history of slavery and freedom in America was far more complex than most people realize. Jaime and France felt a deep responsibility to preserve her memory. They no longer saw their home as just a beautiful old house. It had become a doorway into a painful but important truth. One that reminded everyone that history, especially the uncomfortable parts, can hide in the most unexpected places. Just when the Ardys thought they had uncovered all of the mansion's secrets, they stumbled upon another chilling piece of history, this time from the 20th century. While researching the Munn family line, Jaime found reports of a shocking murder that had taken place in 1922. The victim was Bertha Sparks, a 16-year-old girl from a nearby town. The accused was none other than William Munn, a direct descendant of the same family whose graves lay in their backyard. The news had once shaken all of Oyster Bay. The case was horrifying, involving violence that seemed completely out of place in such a quiet, elegant community. Newspaper articles described it as one of the most disturbing crimes the area had ever seen. To think that this tragedy was connected to the same family who had buried Sophia Moore centuries earlier added another layer of complexity to the mansion's history. The same walls that had once echoed with voices of wealth, privilege, and even compassion had also witnessed acts of cruelty and despair. For the Ardys, this discovery was both haunting and enlightening. It showed them that every generation leaves its mark, some noble, others dark, and that every beautiful place hides shadows of the past that deserve to be remembered over time. Jaime and France realized they were no longer just renovating a house, they were restoring a story. Each floorboard, wall, and garden path seemed to whisper memories of those who had lived there before. They began to document everything. The graves, the carvings, the letters they found, and the stories tied to them. Jaime even wrote a book titled The Chancellor's Mansion, which combined the mansion's architectural restoration with the forgotten lives of people like Sophia Moore. She wanted readers to understand that history isn't just about dates and famous names. It's also about the ordinary, people whose stories were buried, often quite literally, beneath the soil. The Ardys also worked with local historians to make sure Sophia's grave was properly preserved and recognized as an important part of New York's history. Their efforts turned their home into a living museum, one that honored both the beauty and the pain of the past. The mansion became a reminder that every building, no matter how grand, carries traces of the people who built, served, and suffered within its walls. Today, the Chancellor's Mansion stands tall once again, beautifully restored but carrying the heavy stories of those who came before. Visitors often stop to see Sophia Moore's headstone, now carefully protected, and to hear her remarkable story of strength and survival. Her name, once forgotten, now represents the resilience of countless others whose lives shaped America, but were left out of its history books. The same mansion that once symbolized power and wealth now also stands as a lesson in empathy, reminding everyone that history is never simple. It's made of both light and darkness, of pride and shame. The Ardys' discovery turned a renovation into a mission. They showed how important it is to remember the past honestly, even when it makes us uncomfortable. Beneath the beauty of old estates and the charm of quiet towns lie stories of courage, injustice, tragedy, and redemption. The mansion in Oyster Bay is no longer just a house. It's a voice for those who... After uncovering the graves and learning about Sophia Moore, Jaime couldn't stop thinking about the countless others who had lived and worked in the mansion. People who left no headstones or written records. She often wondered what their lives had been like inside those walls. During the renovations, the family found strange signs of the past. Initials carved into wooden beams, faded pencil marks on door frames, and child-sized footprints preserved in old cement. Each mark told a story no one had ever recorded. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the only sound came from the wind outside, Jaime said she could almost feel the presence of those who had once walked there. She imagined Sophia in the kitchen, preparing food while listening to the laughter of the Munn children. She imagined the enslaved workers laboring in the gardens, their songs blending with the rustle of leaves. The mansion seemed to breathe with memories, both beautiful and painful. It wasn't haunted by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by emotions that time hadn't erased. Every sound, a creaking stair, a swinging door, felt like the echo of forgotten lives calling out to be remembered. When the Arties shared their discoveries publicly, Oyster Bay's residents were shocked. Many had lived their whole lives there without realizing that slavery had once existed in their town. Schools had never taught it, museums had never displayed it, and even the oldest families rarely spoke about it. Jaime's findings forced the community to face a truth that had been quietly buried for generations. Some people felt proud that such an important historical figure as Sophia Moore had lived and died in their town. Others were uncomfortable, unsure how to feel about a past that connected their peaceful neighborhood to slavery. Local officials soon decided to include the site in their list of heritage landmarks. Historians came to study it, and journalists wrote articles about it. The mansion became a place of learning, a reminder that history isn't something that happens somewhere else. It happens right where we live, even if we don't notice. Jaime often said that Sophia's story wasn't just about one woman. It was about recognizing the humanity of all those whose lives had been erased from local history. Slowly, the town began to embrace that message. Schools started including lessons about the history of slavery in New York, and visitors began to come from far away to see Sophia's grave and hear her story firsthand. As more people learned about the mansion, it began to represent something larger than itself. It was no longer just an old building restored to beauty. It became a bridge between two Americas, one built on privilege and another on struggle. The Arties opened their home for guided tours, allowing people to see the restored rooms and the preserved artifacts they had found. Inside the dining room, they displayed photos and documents that told Sophia Moore's story alongside others from the Munn family's history. Visitors were often moved to silence as they stood in those rooms, realizing that the very space where wealthy families once held grand dinners had also been a place of servitude. Jaime believed that by showing both sides, the elegance and the exploitation, she could help people understand the full picture of history. "Beauty and pain often share the same walls," she once said in an interview. "You can't appreciate one without acknowledging the other." The mansion became a living museum of contrasts: marble floors and wooden shackles, portraits of nobles and names of the enslaved, all coexisting as they once had in reality. That truth, both uncomfortable and inspiring, made the place unforgettable. Restoration became Jaime's way of honoring history. Every time she sanded a wall or repainted a ceiling, she thought about the hands that had once built it. She refused to replace old materials unless absolutely necessary, insisting on keeping the original wood, glass, and stone wherever possible. "These walls have seen everything," she often said. "They've earned the right to stay." During one part of the renovation, workers found a rusted iron key inside a sealed brick wall. No one knew what it had once opened, but Jaime kept it as a symbol, a key to the past, literally and figuratively. She placed it on display beside Sophia's photograph and a plaque that read, "Every key opens a story." For her, restoration wasn't just physical work. It was emotional healing for a house that had seen both kindness and cruelty. She often invited local artists and historians to paint, write, or speak about the mansion's history. These gatherings turned into small community events, where people of all backgrounds came together to share their interpretations of what the mansion represented. It became a space of dialogue, a place where people could talk honestly about history without judgment or denial. In this way, Jaime and France transformed an old house into a symbol of truth and reconciliation. Sophia Moore's story began to inspire people far beyond Oyster Bay. Her courage, determination, and the rare dignity she received in death resonated deeply with audiences across the country. Documentaries featured her name, newspapers published articles, and scholars cited her as a remarkable example of early African American